I'm glad to be with you today, even if it is via the magic of technology. I want to talk to you today about one, the lead up to the Plaza Accord, two, what happened when we successfully coordinated macroeconomic policy among the world's principal economies in the 1980s, and three, the need for greater coordination in today's complex world. What happened 32 years ago at the Plaza Hotel in New York City was, in many ways, a continuation of the type of international cooperation that had characterized global economics since the end of World War II. America's decision at the end of that war, more than 70 years ago, to stress economic cooperation was part of our broader strategy to rebuild post-World War II economies, and by so doing, to foster stability. Under our leadership, 44 nations, that is under United States leadership, 44 nations signed the Bretton Woods agreements in 1944, creating the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The dollar was pegged to gold, and other world currencies were in turn pegged to the dollar. Soon thereafter, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade was put in place to promote free trade. These agreements provided the foundation for post-war global prosperity. By the time I became Secretary of the Treasury in 1985, we weren't worried about another Great Depression, even though we had gone through a terrible economic downturn only a few years earlier. The Reagan tax cuts and the Fed's successful war on inflation had set the American economy on fire. As the U.S. economy grew, so did the global economy. What concerned us then was how to maintain this prosperity in the face of growing and unsustainable global economic imbalances. We were confronted with an overvalued dollar when measured against other currencies, and a trade imbalance that favored the Japanese, Germans, and other trading partners at the expense of U.S. manufacturers and exporters. Once again, a protectionist fever was burning in Congress, and it grew hotter each time Honda or Mercedes won another customer from the big three. We were determined not to return to the failed go-it-alone policies of the Great Depression that arguably helped lead to World War II. The best way, and perhaps the only way, to solve these problems was to work more closely with the finance ministers and central bankers of other major economies. Item one on our agenda was the dollar. For some years, relative world currency values had been set by the market. Sometimes they fluctuated wildly on international exchanges. This made it difficult for governments, companies, and investors to make long-range plans. A business could do everything right, then be ruined by a sudden overnight move in exchange rates. And the disparity between the strong dollar and weak foreign currencies gave foreign competitors a big advantage over U.S. companies. So we decided to try to improve exchange rate stability by coordinating the underlying economic fundamentals of the major currency countries. And to be effective, we would have to do this with regularity. That process began with the Plaza Accord in 1985. President Reagan liked the idea, and with his approval, we were in a position to go forward. There was, of course, predictable skepticism from other major currency countries, but as the summer of 1985 wore on, and these countries saw protectionist sentiment growing in the U.S. Congress, they began to realize that we were indeed serious. Finally, all of the finance ministers and heads of the central banks of the major currency countries met on Sunday afternoon, September 22, 1985, in the Gold Room of New York's lovely old Plaza Hotel. All the participants had managed to arrive secretly for that Sunday afternoon meeting. We picked that day because world financial markets would be closed. By the end of the day, we had announced what came to be known as the Plaza Accord. The results were truly spectacular. Despite strong resistance from traders, the dollar dropped against other currencies quickly and substantially, but in an orderly way. But the Plaza was about more than just currency adjustments. Importantly, it also established the practice, for a while at least, of multilateral economic policy coordination. Among other things, the United States undertook to control its fiscal deficit with the Gramm-Rudman-Hollings Act, which slowed the rate of growth of federal spending, although frankly it didn't go far enough. Japan agreed to stimulate domestic demand and open its borders to more imports, and Germany said it would reduce the size of its public sector and remove excessive regulations that inhibited the efficiency of its labor and capital markets. Importantly, all signatories promised to fight protectionism. In time, concerns grew that the dollar might have fallen too far. This led to the Louvre Accord of February 22, 1987. While the Plaza was a one-time agreement to deal with a specific set of circumstances, Louvre was more ambitious. It aimed to institutionalize the process of coordination of economic policies to stabilize world currencies within an agreed-upon but unpublished set of ranges. Like the Plaza, it also worked for a while. By 1987, the United States current account deficit, which the Plaza communique had cited as evidence of trouble in the global economic system, had begun to fall. In 1991, it reached zero. Talk in Congress about erecting trade barriers never completely died away, but it subsided. The Reagan economic boom continued and the world's economy grew with it. Of course, multilateral coordination of economic policy is very difficult politically for all of the countries involved. After I left Treasury in 1988, the process continued for a short time and then fell dormant. In President Clinton's second term, Robert Rubin briefly revived it to successfully deal with the East Asian economic crises. Otherwise, and sadly, the process largely ended with the Reagan administration. Admittedly, the circumstances today would make it harder to achieve the goal than it was 30 years ago. When we reached the Plaza Accord, we were dealing with the countries of the G5, France, Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Today, that group has grown to become the G20. Furthermore, China has emerged as a global economic powerhouse. Finally, international capital flows have grown sharply since the 1980s. Still, there are similarities between then and now. The United States current account balance today is about 2.6% of GNP, a big drop from where we stood in 2005 when it was 6.5%. Nevertheless, it is at about the same level it was in 1985 when we in the Reagan administration were so worried. Further, the global economy has not fully recovered from the crash of 2008, much as it had not fully rebounded in 1985. Our growth today is steady but unspectacular. Europe as a whole is growing very slowly. The potential problems in China foreshadow a possible future economic slowdown there. And then as now, protectionist sentiment in the United States is very much on the rise. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I submit that we should attempt to reestablish the spirit of the Plaza Accord, if not the agreement's specific provisions. Frankly, it is a bridge too far today to try and coordinate a correction on the imbalance of exchange rates like we did back then. The currency imbalances aren't as severe today as they were in 1985, because the relative strength of the dollar is not as great today as it was during the lead up to the Plaza Accord. Meanwhile, there would not be much support from the other major currency countries to lower the value of the dollar because they now have a trade advantage as the dollar is strong. However, and this is an important however, we definitely should embark once again upon a sustained, regular, and comprehensive effort to coordinate international economic policy. Yes, we are living in a new economic world with more players, more complex markets, and gigantic capital flows. But that is no reason not to make the effort. If we want to maximize long-term growth, minimize the risk of protectionism, and create greater stability in foreign exchange rates, then we should learn from our experience with the Plaza Accord and work consistently, vigorously, and in a regular, sustained way to coordinate macroeconomic policies. Jack Kemp would, I think, agree with these conclusions. And Jack would also recognize that that will require leadership from many countries, but most of all from the United States of America, the world's largest economy and home of the de facto reserve currency of the world. Thank you.